Hey Tyler, I've come up with a really, really good way for me to make a bunch of money in a really short amount of time.
Okay, that sounds great. Let's hear
Okay.
it.
Okay. So my plan is to rob a bank, potentially even something big like Fort Knox.
Wow,
Yeah.
that is a bold idea. Sounds
Right.
great. Uh, do you have a plan already in motion for this?
Yeah. I mean, of course I've got a plan. I mean, like nobody tries to break into vaults. Nobody tries to get into a place like Fort Knox, and it's because they don't have a plan. And it
Hmm,
just seems impossible to do. But I've got a plan. You ready for this? Okay,
I think so, yeah.
this is how I get in. Erosion.
Er, I'm sorry, erosion?
Erosion. Did you
Erosion.
know that water is like the most powerful substance on the planet? It can do anything.
I mean, it's a life-giving substance, but
The Grand Canyon was created because of erosion. Look at how big of a hole that is.
I mean, that was over like thousands or millions of years. I don't even know. It
I
didn't happen
think,
overnight.
yeah, but I don't need to make something the size of the Grand Canyon. I only need to make enough of a hole for me to get into a vault. I could probably do that in like a few hours, like an evening.
Wow. You think so?
I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it. I read it in a book somewhere that that if you just pour water, then you can get out of a jail. Or I'm saying reverse engineer this, get into a bank.
Hmm. Well, I gotta tell you, this sounds like an absolutely terrible idea. I don't think it would work. I mean, it would work in a million years, but not in a shorter time span.
This is one of those ideas that is such a great way of putting it. This is one of those ideas that is such a terrible idea that would only work in a million years, but will
Yes,
not work in any period of time less than a million years.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Hello and welcome to Woeful Wednesdays. Nathan reads a series of unfortunate events. Ignore the tattoo. My name is Nathan.
And I'm Tyler.
If you are new to this, we are reading through a series of unfortunate events. We are doing a video for each of the books. We're in fact doing 3 videos for each book, and so we're posting them weekly. And we are looking at chapters 1 to 4, 5 to 8, and then 9 to 13 in each book. This week we are on chapters 9 to 13 in book the seventh, The Vile Village.
Hmm. Yeah, and we do have a sponsor for today's episode.
Oh, good. Because I don't
I
know that my plan to break into a bank is going to work. We might need to have some other source of revenue for the podcast.
Right. Yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, so I'm very happy about our sponsor. Maybe they would even be useful in this plan of yours. I don't know. But anyway, everybody loves sponge cake, right?
Sure.
But it's always seemed like a bit of a misnomer. Well, now there's Sonny's sponge bread. One single loaf is guaranteed to soak up and wring out water for hours upon hours upon hours. You're not going to lose a single drop of water this way.
Huh.
None. This bread, it can just absorb water, and you wring it out, it can absorb more water.
Will I lose any bread by wringing it out?
No, yeah, it's going to stay more or less the same size.
This sounds great. Now, how's the flavor?
Sponge, but you know, it's fine. It's fine. It's not really designed for eating, but you can eat it in an emergency.
Are you just selling a sponge in the bakery aisle now?
All right, you caught me.
It's a terrible sponsor.
Shh, you're giving us money.
Okay, I'm sorry. Folks, go out and get your sponge bread today. You're gonna hate it.
Yeah, absolutely. This product is not designed for human consumption. It has not been approved by the FDA, but still, go out and buy it. You'll find plenty of uses for it, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, certainly for the in laws when they visit.
Right.
All right, folks, I hope you enjoy.
Ignore the tattoo! Nathan unfortunately reads a series of unfortunate events at an unfortunate age, which in this case is being used to indicate that he is entirely too old to be reading this for the first time.
All right, so we are talking about chapters 9 to 13 in The Vile Village, book the 7th. Tyler, you've got plot summary duty for the week.
Yes. So where we left off, then Jacques, the stranger with a single eyebrow and a tattoo on his ankle, had been killed. Lo and behold, we now have Count Olaf appearing under the name. Oh, what was it again? It was Detective. Oh my goodness, how have I already forgotten it?
Dupin.
Dupin. That's right, Detective Dupin. Thank you. Yes, Detective Dupin, who is a very cool, stylish guy.
So cool. Like the
He's so cool that
Fonz.
he has to remind you constantly that he is cool.
Right.
Uh,
That's what cool
yes,
people do.
absolutely.
There's a lot
And
of
so,
effort involved.
right. Yeah. All right. So Detective Dupin claims that the Baudelaires are the primary suspects in Jacques' murder, uh, and that Sonny Baudelaire is the actual murderer,
Mm-hmm.
uh, with the other two Baudelaires being accomplices. So, of course, all three of them are thrown in prison. They are given bread and water. They need to find their way out. And so they come up with this irrigation style system of erosion where they pour water down down a bench, which then hits the wall and then goes into a loaf of bread, which is apparently very spongy because it absorbs all of the water. They are then able to wring out this loaf of bread back into the jug.
Mm-hmm.
And then they just repeat this process over and over again in order to loosen the mortar holding together this brick wall, which is not described to be in any state of disrepair or anything like that. Um, yeah, so they do that for the entire evening, the entire night. They do not sleep at all. They do not
Mm.
eat, obviously, because they are using the bread as
Right.
part of their plan. I don't know when the children last ate, to be quite honest. This is ridiculous. I don't
I
know if
think
you.
they had huevos rancheros with Hector.
Right. Okay. So they had that.
But I
But
think that was like the day before, wasn't it?
yeah, it would have been the night before because they had to rush out to save Jacques and they
Yeah.
failed and then were thrown in prison, given one loaf of bread and a pitcher of water. And then that's the entire night
Uh-huh.
there. And then they do get out of the prison cell by partly by this plan of erosion, but also partly by using the bench as a battering ram, which is actually a much better plan, I guess. Once you've loosened the mortar, then sure.
And they haven't had any water either
Right.
because they're
Yeah.
pouring that down the wall.
Yep. And so then the next morning, then they break out. And I'm going to let you know when I get to a point where they could possibly have eaten. Yeah, because then the next morning, then Hector comes by. He gives them a little another couplet. Klaus is able to figure out that it is telling them that the Quagmires are hidden in Foul Fountain, which Olaf has placed them in there. The Baudelaires get the Quagmires out of there by finding a secret button. Um, and then they all run away down the streets, um, back to Hector's house. Hector comes with his self-sustaining hot air mobile home, um, and yeah, then let's see. Then the Quagmires climb up the ladder first onto Hector's blah 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 blah, and then Violet, Klaus, and Sunny are climbing up the ladder, but it is struck by a harpoon, which Esme Squalor, who was disguising herself as Officer Luciana, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yes, and she was shooting harpoons. One hit the ladder that they were climbing up, and they know that they can't make it up to the top. So, yeah, then they climb back down, they land on the ground, they're in trouble, but then the Council of Elders decides to go, they decide to have a council meeting, or they go after, yeah, or they try to save the crow. I'm sorry. Yes, they try to save the crow, which has also been hit by by a harpoon. And so they leave the children there, thinking that the children will definitely stay there to be punished. Yeah, so and by this point, it is evening again.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a full 48 hours.
And they're going to leave this town and go back to that bus stop, even though they have no money and no bus ticket. And wasn't it hours and hours for them to walk from the bus stop to the town?
I believe so.
Across a desert environment?
This whole thing has just made me think, like, is this video game time where it's just accelerated? One day is like 20 minutes or something?
Yes. Yes. I think so.
Because, yeah, I don't fully understand the timeline here. They spend the entire night in jail. Hector comes in the morning to give them a couplet, and then it is getting close to the afternoon, or to noon, which is when the
crows migrate.
Yes.
Or maybe not migrate, but just move to a different part of town.
Yeah. So it's very odd. I don't quite understand. I feel like Handler definitely lost track of how much time was going by while writing this.
Yeah, that's the thing, is when you're writing comedic books, then they can become wacky and slapstick, right? Like, not all comedy does that, but he's clearly not going for verisimilitude. He's not trying to make these books match the real world. So he can just, say, yeah, like, that's not the point of the books. But it does. But then he also seems to be attempting to have suspense and tension in these books.
Yeah.
And that's where it falls apart. Then you can't have suspense and tension if everything feels silly and completely unrealistic. You really had that with the Airsats elevator.
Yeah.
Of absolutely. Them, like, going up and down the elevator shaft. It's just like, who cares? This is all obviously ridiculous. There's even them getting thrown down the elevator shaft, and then there's a net. Then.
Yeah. So a few quick notes to add to the plot summary. All right, so number one is this whole discussion of which comes, I think there are 3 different instances of it, where it's all lampshading, where he's just saying, like, oh, since I'm pointing out that it is this, then it's not as bad that it's in there. Which
I've got other thoughts on this, but I'll wait until we get to those sections.
Okay. All right, and then the where was this? This was Esme hiding as Officer Luciana. Did you see that coming?
No, I did not. I did not.
That's good that worked.
Yeah, to be fair, I don't know how much I puzzle over the books.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, and just because, I'm not much of a fan of mysteries, and when you've got mystery elements in a book like that, like, I like there being a mystery in a book, but I don't like the mystery genre, because the mystery genre of a discerning reader will notice these clues and that they're carefully scrutinizing it, and they go, I figured it out like 20 pages in, or I figured it out halfway through, and they get all smug because they figured out the clues are in there, and, like, there's all the rules of it has to be possible for the reader to figure out the who the real killer is and all of that. I'm not interested in that.
Yeah.
Like the big reveals and, like, didn't you notice that we dropped a little clue over here? I'm like, okay, so you dropped a clue. I guess I'm saying I mostly don't read for plot. I read for character. I read for theme. I read for voice, for writing style. I don't read for plot. Yeah, I mean, like, I just feel like I guess I've never quite said that on the, like, in these discussions, but most people, like, most people who are really interested in studying and analyzing literature, like, plot is kind of like the base level of you need to know what happens at the plot level, but plot is really not that interesting.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, that is 100%. The other note is, of course, that Jacques Snicket, as you had theorized or read into, then he is indeed, he does appear to be Lemony Snicket's
A family
brother.
member.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so that is, that's good that you caught that, and that, yeah, it's a little bit of a, I don't even want to say that it's a surprise or anything. It's just kind of like a, huh. Well, then, yeah, that totally makes sense why Lemony Snicket is, describes it as being such a sad day and everything. And
Right.
yeah. Um, all right. So those that is my plot summary with
Okay.
added notes.
All right, so let's start by looking at, let's go chapter by chapter. So looking at chapter 9,
Mhm.
do you mind if I go first?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, so the bottom of page 155, this is just a couple pages into chapter 9. Then this is like where we get introduced to Detective Dupin, right?
Hmm.
And so I'll read kind of from the middle of the page there. It says, "The famous Detective Dupin," Mr. Lesko said. "Just imagine. I've never heard of him," said a nearby elder. "Me neither," Mr. Lesko admitted, "but I'm sure he's very famous." I don't even know how that works. Just, I'm assuming he's famous without
Right.
any real reason for assuming that he's famous.
Yes. Well, Officer Luciana says the famous Detective Dupin, and that has immediately triggered, oh, okay, he must be very famous to Mr.
Yeah.
Lesko.
Um,
The oblivious nature of adults continues.
right. And then what happened? Violet asked, trying not to look at the white sheet on the ground. How was Jacques killed? Why wasn't anybody guarding him? How could someone have gotten into his cell if you locked it? Oh, by the way, this reminds me, Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself.
Okay. All right, then.
Are you not familiar with this?
I am, yes.
This is the Jeffrey Epstein story. It's how was Jeffrey Epstein killed? Why wasn't anybody guarding him? How could someone have gotten into his cell if you locked it? Like, or how could he have done this if he, like, all of the evidence, like, it's the craziest story ever, and it's such a great setup for it. So if you don't see the obvious setup for it, Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself joke there, I mean whatever it happens to be, of everyone knows that, like, the real story is the one that's impossible to believe.
Right.
Like what, like the actual events are said to have happened. That I mean, it's incredibly suspicious. So anyway, I just thought
Mhm.
that was a fun little part. And then page 165, then it says, yeah, so this is bottom of 164. "These children need to be taken care of as quickly as possible. I say that we burn them at the stake," cried Mr. Lesko, who stepped forward to wag his finger at the children. "Rule number 201 clearly says no murdering." I'm like, oh, took them 200 rules to get to that one.
Yes, I had the same thought when I read that. I went, really? I think
Boy.
there's another moment later on when they say that like breaking out of jail is rule like
Oh,
1,700 or
yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Why are these rules?
1,742. I've got a note for that one too. So, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there. Yeah, it's nice little moments of comedy that you get in there.
Mhm.
All right, I'm done with chapter 9.
All right. Let me see. Yes, I do have one other note here, which is just on page 168. Um, yes, this is the moment when we finally get to know what Count Olaf's plan actually is in this book, where he did not appear for the first, 2/3.
Yep.
So yes, him just saying, don't worry, he said in his wheezy voice, you won't be burned at the stake, not all of you at least. Tomorrow afternoon, one of you will make a miraculous escape. if you consider being smuggled out of VFD by one of my assistants to be an escape. The other two will burn at the stake as planned. You bratty orphans are too stupid to realize it, but a genius like me knows that it may take a village to raise a child, but it only takes one child to inherit a fortune. So he has seemingly kind of changed gears here, where he no longer is interested in getting all three Baudelaires, but that he's only interested, like he really wants two of them to die, and then just to take the third one.
He's been so inconsistent. He's all over the place.
Yeah.
In this book, that's the plan, that he'll get all three of them, kill two of them, and then keep one. But other times it seems like he wants to kill all three of them. Other times it's like he wants to have all three of them under his guardianship. I guess that's sort of a plan that he's got in this one. It's a better, more specific plan than we've had in many of the books.
Yeah. All right. On to chapter 10.
Yeah.
And I suppose I can go first this time. So my first note is on page 175. I really like this moment where the children are actually getting like at each other's throats. With Klaus and Violet being mad at each other. So
brief, though.
It is very brief, but I do like that it's in there. I mean, come on, they haven't had food for 24 hours.
Yeah, so how would the hanger disappear that quickly? They say one, snipey little comment to the other person, and then you get a response, and then it's like, hey, don't fight. And it's like, okay, we won't fight.
Yeah, once again, Sunny proving her worth here, compared to the two elder Baudelaire children.
They are acting like adults. That's what would happen if you have full-grown, mature adults who are, psychologically very mature and well-developed, who then, start sniping at each other, and then somebody else says, hey, let's not do this. And then it's like, you're right, let's not. Children do not de-escalate like that.
Right.
But this entire community and universe that these books are taking place within, it's flipped. The children are the adults, they're mature, and the adults are idiots and they're immature.
Yes. Yep. All right. So then on page 177, then we get the whole discussion of Deus Ex Machina, the introduction to it. And this does come back on... It comes back several times throughout here. So did you just want to talk about the whole thing now?
Sure. Sure. So... let me see. I want to read from the bottom of 177 where you get the initial description of it. Mm-hmm. So you first get Deus Ex Machina. The description is not a who, Klaus said, it's a what. Deus Ex Machina is a Latin term that means the god from the machine. It means the arrival of something helpful when you least expect it. We need to rescue two triplets from the clutches of a villain and solve the sinister mystery surrounding us, but we're trapped in the filthiest cell of the uptown jail. And tomorrow afternoon, we're supposed to be burned at the stake. It would be a wonderful time for something helpful to arrive unexpectedly. So it's a decent explanation. It's a decent description of Deus Ex Machina. It's not the actual history of it, but that's fine. He kind of gets the point. It's not just something wonderful that arrives unexpectedly, because, and I guess I'll just say it. This is my point here. I find this section really, really interesting because the concept of Deus Ex Machina comes from Latin playwrights, and you had the criticism. I forget who it was who initially came up with it. I think it was Latin playwrights, unless it went back to the Greeks. But the idea of, if you've got such a convoluted plot that it's impossible to solve, and you've got your characters in this impossible situation from which to escape, then if you have one of the actual gods, a Roman god who comes down out of the sky in their machine, then they just solve everything. And It's because it's a criticism. It's an insult. You're a poor writer. You didn't plot this well. You got into a point in the story where you couldn't resolve it from the logic within the story. So you
Yes.
now have to pull in this supernatural figure to resolve these events. It's
Right.
a bad thing, and you label that to a writer. But in real life, nobody says, "Isn't this awful that this wonderful thing happened to me? This is bad writing. This is bad writing from God that I just won the
Right.
lottery when I was so poor and I had all this debt and I, got, laid off, but then I won the Powerball lottery and I've now got $200 million." Nobody goes like, "No, that's a crappy ending to my life." Like nobody says that. Like, so it's an interesting thing where you can criticize the writer and say, "Oh, that's bad writing, Daniel Handler," but the characters are going to be grateful for it.
Right. Yeah. So I do have. Yeah. It's very true, and when I say that, like, there is like lampshading later on, where, him talking about it being Deus Ex Machina. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the phrase lampshading.
No.
Yeah, so it's basically you're you're shining the light on what you're doing in order to make people realize that you know what you're doing, in order to make people not as upset that you're doing it.
Right. Right.
So that's very much what Handler is doing here, where he's like, hey, you can't really criticize me for, including Deus Ex Machina, because I'm talking about how it's Deus Ex Machina and it's so, unbelievable and whatever. So, yeah, there's all sorts of criticism around lampshading as well, where it's like, that doesn't really excuse you still having those moments. And to me, though, then the big key here is that these aren't really great moments of Deus Ex Machina.
No.
Everything's been set up. Hector
Yeah.
doesn't come out of the blue. He's not some,
There,
unknown
it's not
figure.
Deus Ex Machina. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's not even that. And like I think that's
Yeah.
kind of the funny thing is if you do understand it, then you go, "Oh, okay, that's it's funny that he says that that's what's happening, or at least Klaus believes that's what's happening, but it's not.
Yeah.
It is another instance of Handler instructing children in different literary devices, uh, and different elements of fiction that he's
Hmm.
saying you're going to recognize this, and this is a little bit of literary criticism of explaining these concepts to children. But I mean, the idea of like if people say like I know the concept, but I didn't know the term of lampshading. And so for people who then criticize it and say, well, that doesn't help it, it's like, well, it totally depends on genre.
Right.
Because because it's not about what you're doing, it's why you're doing it. It's what the ultimate effect is. So if the
Mhm.
effect ends up making the reader laugh and you're writing comedic books, then that's a good thing to do. But if your intention is to be writing really serious books that are supposed to, represent the real world, then yeah, even if you point out different elements of fiction that you're using, like including like, oh, here's a weak area that I have, but I'm going to point it out so that excuses it, then no, that doesn't work in a serious piece of literature. But these things are not carefully plotted by any means. They're not carefully crafted and thought through. These
Right.
are comedic books, and they are essentially slapstick at multiple instances. They're just ridiculous that none of this
Yeah.
stuff is supposed to match the real world. So you're like, you can do whatever you want in these books because you're not trying to accurately mirror the world. You're
Hmm.
already doing weird and wacky things.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. So I guess my point here about, this not being Deus Ex Machina is there, or not really my point, but just a good example of it is, toward the end where Hector appearing with the um, self-sustaining hot air mobile home, then that's also described as a Deus Ex Machina, and
But it's not.
it's not, and obviously there's this there is a literal callback to the origins of it with the gods of ancient Greek or
Rome.
or what have you, or of Rome. Then you would have them descending on mechanical devices, and so there's a nice little play there, and I appreciate that. except that it's not Deus Ex Machina. If Hector had not told the children at all
Correct.
about it, and
Then
then
it
this
would have
thing just appeared, then
Correct.
they'd be like, whoa, when did Hector have time to build this?
Right.
And then it would be a Deus Ex Machina. But the
Mhm.
fact that you set it up means that it's no longer a Deus Ex
Correct.
Machina.
Correct.
So
Yeah, but I think that that's such a Snicket way of explaining a literary device or an element of fiction
right.
that he understands what it is, but then his example is terrible.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
it's like, yeah, that's basically what Deus Ex Machina is, but that's not the example though of it.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. So moving on page 179, we get this revelation that it is actually Klaus's birthday, his 13th birthday, which, just pulls back to his introduction in this particular book, where he is described as being almost 13. So I think that's a nice moment, and it is a good moment of, the children being together. It's a sincere moment of them being together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have much else to say about that.
Yeah, my only, I might as well give my comment here. So this is on page 180, where he says, "I don't mean to sound spoiled," he said, "but I was hoping for a better birthday meal than bread and water in the deluxe cell of the uptown jail in the village of foul devotees." And of course, because like his parents were planning to make him this much nicer meal, and you're like, oh. And then my note was, selfish brat. How dare you, Klaus? You're hoping for a better meal than that. You should be lucky that you even have that. You should be grateful for this.
It's been 24 hours since you last got food. Eat this! It'll taste delicious because of how long it's been.
Right. That's one of the great things about going hungry for a while. Then when you eat again, whoo! Oh boy,
Yeah.
does it taste good. It's wild that the body does that.
Yeah, absolutely. But yes, I believe that was my only other note for chapter 10, because then I just have another note about Deus Ex Machina, and about that whole thing with the breaking down the brick wall.
Yeah. All right. So I've got a note there. So I'm just going to read that section. So it says, but how, Klaus asked, this is page 183. But how, Klaus asked, the walls are so solid and water is so gentle. Water is one of the most powerful forces on Earth, Violet replied. Ocean waves can wear away at cliffs made of stone. Donax, I'm not sure if Donax means anything, but that's what Sonny says, which meant something like, but that takes years and years, and if we don't escape, we'll all be burned at the stake tomorrow afternoon. Then we'd better stop entertaining the notion and start pouring the water, Violet said. We'll have to keep it up all night if we want to dissolve the mortar. I'll stand at this end, propping up the bench, right? And then it continues on. And I'm like, if you wanted, and I feel like there's so many opportunities for comedy, but it wouldn't fit with the way Snicket writes. But if you wanted to make this scene hilarious, then wouldn't you have Klaus at this point freak out and, verbally attack Violet and just scream at her? Erosion? That's your plan? Erosion? That's how we're going to get out of here? That's your invention? You just invented erosion? That's not an invention, Violet. You didn't invent anything. That's water just sitting on a surface. That's not anything.
Yes.
That would have been funny to me if he freaked out at her. But instead, they invent the most ridiculous things. Like she invents, putting the fire pokers into the oven to get them to be hot. So that way she's got some kind of welding torch. She invented that. You didn't invent putting something in the oven and then it heats up. That's not you inventing it, Violet. If there was some criticism of that, I feel like there'd be great comedy. But instead, because if you think about this, so much comedy comes from conflict.
Right.
Absolutely. What comedy comes from harmony? What comedy comes from two people who just agree with each other so profoundly that everything they say just makes perfect sense and is brilliant, no matter how stupid it is? Right. Then you can't get comedy from that.
Yeah.
And that's what happens again and again and again in these books. These kids just go, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. That's a great idea. The Quagmires, the Baudelaires, no matter what they do, everything's a great idea, even when it's stupid.
Oh yeah, they are. Yeah, they are compliment machines. Just constantly being like, "Oh yeah, that's you're so brilliant for this. You're so brilliant for that." That's why I really appreciate that one moment of them actually fighting amongst themselves.
But they weren't fighting about anything specific. This would have been a great point because, like, make it a real fight.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did look it up. Donax is a genus of small edible saltwater clam marine bivalve mollusks. The genus is sometimes known as bean clams or wedge shells. However, Donax species have numerous different common names in different parts of the world.
Okay.
Yep, no idea why he decided to go with that word, but yep. It's a thing.
All right. A clam. Got it.
Clam up.
All right, I'm done with chapter 10, and I have no notes for chapter 11.
All right, I have a couple notes for chapter 11. Number one is just on page 195 with Klaus figuring out, 194 into 195, figuring out all the couplets. I really do enjoy this kind of puzzle. It's incredible that the Quagmires were able to come up with this and give enough clues that the Baudelaires were able to figure it out while they were stuck in a fountain.
That she could write this while being stuck in a fountain with water pouring over them all the time. Okay.
Yep. But I do really like the idea of, having 4 different couplets which end up the initials of each line, the initial letter of each line spells out the word fountain.
Right. This is just a funny little aside, but I forget who was interviewing him, but somebody was interviewing Arnold Schwarzenegger, and they were asking him because when he was governor, then at one point he sent out a tweet, and it was in regards to a criticism I think that a political opponent or a journalist had made against him when he was governor, and the way he wrote it, then if you looked at it, then the first letter of each line ended up spelling something like F-U-C-K or like F-U-C-K-U or something like that. And then the journalist asked him, they're like, because the rest of the tweet was a perfectly normal political tweet to send out.
Right.
And they're like, have you heard that there's some suspicion? He's like, I have no idea. And then afterwards, because it's not that long ago, that he's like, oh yes, I did that on purpose. It was just so it happens. I feel like people don't look for it enough because I wonder how often.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, there's. I saw a similar thing on Twitter where you had to read it. They ended up having to write it in reverse so that you'd be able to read their most recent tweet and go down throughout all of their tweets. And it ended up, I think it was just the first word and not the first letter of each tweet. But it was this whole explanation about how, he and his girlfriend or wife or something were breaking up. And this was, months in the making. I'm like, what? How did you do this? Why?
Very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, things like that are fun. They are fun.
Absolutely.
And it's a little I guess a linguistic logic puzzle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, because it's not exactly a riddle. Right.
Yeah.
That's why I don't know what exactly the description would be, but anyway, it's an encoded message. So
yeah. Yeah. All right. So I have one other note for this chapter, which is on page 201. I'm just going to read the paragraph that starts toward the bottom there. A huge cloud of dust is not a beautiful thing to look at. Very few painters have done portraits of huge clouds of dust or included them in their landscapes or still lifes. Film directors rarely choose huge clouds of dust to play the lead roles in romantic comedies, and as far as my research has shown, a huge cloud of dust has never placed higher than 25th in a beauty pageant. It's just such a great joke because it's so off the wall ridiculous that I guess a cloud of dust has gotten 26th in a beauty pageant potentially.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I really not really enjoyed it, but I did enjoy that moment.
Yeah. No, it's definitely such sarcastic writing that yeah, if you have to be somewhat paying attention because he's saying it matter of fact.
Right. Yes.
And it's not an obvious joke, but that's how these books are written. But that is a good example of it, of just a lot of matter of fact explanation of things
Yes.
But this one's, I mean, I guess you do have like the first one's a reasonable thing to say. Like very few painters have done portraits of huge clouds of dust. Okay,
Right.
sure. And then it's like, film directors don't get them to, be the star of a romantic comedy, but then it's they rarely do that.
Right.
And
even then just the starring role, which means that huge clouds of dust could be
they could be like the
cast
best
in other
friend.
roles.
Yeah, they could be a supporting character, but they're just not the lead.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's funny. It's funny.
Yeah. And yes, so those were my only notes for chapter 11.
Okay. All right, I guess I'll go first for chapter 12. This is on page 214, and it's that first paragraph where he says that but I can warn you, unlike the Baudelaire orphans and the Quagmire triplets, and me and my dear departed Beatrice, can stop this wretched story at this very moment and see what happens at the end of The Littlest Elf instead. Okay, so The Littlest Elf is a book that's mentioned at the very, very beginning, right? And then Snicket says it's a much better book to read. And then I think is it Hector who says it's a terrible book to read?
I believe so, yes.
So we know that it's an awful book, but it's an alternative book. Okay, you could be spending your time reading The Littlest Elf instead of reading this.
Right.
Okay. But this is, I don't know if you caught this, but you'll see exactly what I mean as soon as I say it. This is television logic. It's like we started reading this book and then The Littlest Elf is going on at the same time. Like if you start watching a TV show at 8 p.m. and you know that it's going to be an hour-long show, and there's another hour-long show that's also on TV, but it's on a different channel, and then at like 8:45, 8:50, you're like, oh, I don't want to see the ending of this. Maybe I can go check out the ending of that other thing. If you go and start watching the other show, it's not going to start at the very beginning of the show. You're only going to catch the tail end of it because they're being played simultaneously just on different channels. And so this is television logic. And this is another example of these books being written for kids who are not readers. Kids who have grown up on television. And because this is before streaming platforms had taken over, right? In like the early 2000s. And so if you look at it again, then he says, but I can warn you, unlike the Baudelaire orphans and the Quagmire triplets, and me and my dear departed Beatrice, can stop this wretched story at this very moment and see what happens at the end of The Littlest Elf instead.
Right.
Like they're playing. Because
Yes.
like, oh, well, we're almost finished this book. That means if I pick up The Littlest Elf, then I have to start at page 214 of that one as well.
Right. Yes. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, very, very, yeah.
It seemed really interesting to me because once I figured out what that was, because I'm like, oh, that's a funny way of saying it. I'm like, what does that mean? I'm like, that's how you describe it if you're watching TV.
Right. Yeah.
And it makes sense because they're not really written for readers. They're introductory books for readers to pull in young readers. All right, page 216. This is that rule that we were mentioning about not being able to escape. So it says they've escaped. He cried. Rule number 1742 clearly states that no one is allowed to escape from jail. How dare they disobey this rule? I think I've mentioned it before to you. I don't know if we've ever talked about it on my channel, but there's there was a sitcom from the 1980s called Perfect Strangers, and basically they're like distant cousins or something like that. And one of them has grown up in America. The other guy has grown up in some Eastern European country, like it's a fictional country. And then he comes over to America, and they now live together in this apartment in Chicago. And Balky is the guy from Europe who is trying to adjust to life in America, but he's got all these weird customs from his home country. And he says that in his home country, they don't even have like proper like bars and walls to their jails. He's like, oh, we just have a circle in the middle of the town square, and that's where we put people who break the rules. And then it's like, well, what's to stop them from leaving? And then he goes, well, they're just going to put them back in the circle. As a kid, I loved it. I thought it was the funniest thing because it's so silly, right?
Yeah.
And it made so much sense to Balky of like, well, why would somebody leave? They're just going to have to, you know what I mean? It's just, I'm just going to keep putting you back here. I'm just going to keep putting you back here. So eventually you're just like, well, there's no point in leaving. And that's basically the way this community works. It's, it clearly states no one is allowed to escape from jail. How dare they disobey this rule? It's like, are we allowed to escape from jail? Sure. Okay, then we will escape. But like,
right.
Oh no, you're not allowed to escape. Oh, okay, I guess we better not. It's that kind of bizarre logic.
Yeah, it's the idea to me of like, if you don't have a rule against it, then it must be allowed. We had kind of mentioned this before, comparing U.S. law to some other countries, the British Commonwealth, for example.
Yeah, like British common law. I don't know that we were recording at the time when I brought this up, but it basically, British common law says here are all of the things that are illegal. So if it's not mentioned, everything else is permissible. But then what happened is during the French Revolution, then you got the Declaration of the Rights of Man. And what the French did with that is they specifically mentioned these are your freedoms. These are the specific things that you are allowed to do and that you have access to. So then from there, that's a list that's constantly growing, that you say, wait, is it on the list? Am I allowed to do that? Oh, I don't see it on the list, so I guess I'm not allowed to do that. We need to add it to the list. But in British common law, it's just, if it's not like expressly mentioned as being illegal, then you're free to do it. And it seems to be a difference in these two systems, that it's kind of poking fun at the idea of, if you expressly enumerate each person's rights and freedoms, then it's going to go on forever. It's like, am I free to do this? You know what I mean?
Right.
Am I free to do this? Am I free to do this? It's add it to the list, and then it just keeps going and going and going and going, instead of saying that, well, you just can't do these few things. Everything else is fine.
Right. Yeah, and it's I guess that's also a bit of a trope in animal sports movies of, oh, well, there's nothing in the rule book that says this animal can't play the sport, so I guess it's okay. Right.
Yeah, like Air Bud and all of those things.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely an example of British common law.
Right. Yeah.
Somebody needs to write that essay. Air Bud as illustrative of the history of British common law.
Absolutely.
I would love to see that essay. All right, and let me think. I think, were you going through chapter 12 or was I going?
You were.
Okay. My only other note, and this is my last note for the entire book, is still in chapter 12. It's on page 222. And this is where you get the mention that Jacques, his full name is Jacques Snicket. That sounds familiar, Violet said. I'm not surprised, Duncan said. Jacques Snicket is the brother of a man who, and then it gets cut off. So it's interesting, not just that Jacques is a Snicket, and the narrator of these books, of course, is Lemony Snicket, but that, because I was kind of speculating as well that maybe Lemony Snicket is related to the Baudelaires in some way, right? That maybe that's why he's writing these books, that he's got some connection to their parents, Maybe even like one of their parents is like a Snicket or something. There seems to be like, why is he telling this story? What's the connection there?
Yeah.
But then Violet says that the name sounds familiar, but she can't place it. So that's really puzzling. I think that's far more interesting than the fact that his name is Jacques Snicket. So he's related to the narrator. It's, wait, the name Snicket is familiar to Violet? Because we know that Lemony Snicket is interested in what happens to the Baudelaires, but we don't know that they have any idea of who he is, because it seems like initially he's a journalist who's coming along after the fact, who's now trying to document what's happened to them. And then it's like, why is he interested in documenting this? Oh, it could be he's interested in documenting it because he's got some kind of personal connection. But then it's like, but then it gets back into, so then how do the Baudelaires maybe know him?
Right. Yeah. So it's this is a good point to bring up the author description at the end of this book. I'm not sure if you
I did
read
look
it.
at it. Yeah.
Yeah. It says Lemony Snicket is the author of quite a few books, all dreadful, and has been accused of many crimes, all falsely. Until recently, he was living someplace else.
Yeah.
So the idea of him being accused of many crimes, that's what my mind goes to when it says, Jacques Snicket is the brother of a man who, then it could be, that he was about to say a very well-known crime that was potentially placed on Lemony Snicket.
This is a great point, yeah. And we know that Olaf likes framing people for crimes.
Right, yeah.
That would make sense why he's also interested in telling the story about Olaf.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of interesting things there, and this is where we're starting to get more into the mystery elements of these books. And they're not mystery books, but they have a lot of mysterious things in them that you do need to piece together, puzzles that you need to sort out. And that's one of the main reasons why I like them. So that's why I'm glad that we're really getting into these now.
Right.
But yeah.
Okay. So I guess you've still got notes for chapters 12 and 13?
Yes. All right. So on page 219 in chapter 12, then the Quagmires are explaining what happened. Olaf smuggled us away in that item from the inn auction with the help of Esme Squalor, Duncan began, referring to the last time the Baudelaires had seen him and his sister. And he hid us for a while in the tower room of his terrible house. It's just, okay, no, like the police have not seized that house or
yeah,
or are watching it or anything. And like I'm like, anybody watching it, and then I'm like, right, it's these books. So all the adults are too oblivious to think that he would do that. Oh, he would never go back to his own house, or
it's
something along those lines.
No, it's great that you mentioned that, and that you mentioned like how have the police not seized the house, or are not observing it, like they're not monitoring it in some way. This is a genuine question for you. Have we ever seen a police officer in these books? Ever? Do we have any evidence that police even exist in this world? They talk about, they refer to the police, but there's no evidence that the police exist.
Luciana, who is not an actual
She's
police
not an actual
officer.
cop. She's not an actual cop. Yeah. And then isn't it in the reptile? No, they didn't call the police. They called a doctor, and then the doctor immediately showed up, who is one of Olaf's friends. But it's constantly call the police, but we never see the police.
Right. Yeah,
I want to know, like,
interesting.
I can't remember if there's ever been an instance where we ever have any evidence. Like, I think maybe the police are just a myth that people think they're out there, but they're really not.
And Mr. Poe calling that Vietnamese restaurant.
He called the police. He called the emergency line for the police, and it was a Vietnamese restaurant, and he just talked to them.
Right.
We have no evidence that they're real.
That's a very good point.
Somebody answer me. Please tell me if there's any evidence, like maybe in later books, but I want to know, especially for the first 7. I can't remember seeing any evidence that they're actually there.
Yeah, I don't remember that either. That's really interesting.
Yeah. I feel like they're just mythical creatures and everybody like is sure that they're there, but no one's ever seen one.
Right. That's really interesting.
Because maybe that's how like Olaf is doing this. Because
Right.
just
The
keep thinking
police never catch him because nobody's going after him.
Right. That's what I'm saying. And like he's never going to get caught because like there are no police. So Mr. Poe, all that he does is he's like, well, the police should get him, you know?
Yeah.
Okay. But if there are no police, then nobody will ever get him.
Right.
So all that he has to do is just run away.
Yeah. Yep. That's, huh. All right. Well, moving on for now, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know what to do.
That I'm going to have to think through. That's
this is a good point, though. We need to think on this.
Yeah.
I don't have anything to say other than just going, huh.
Yeah. All right. So on page 247 into chapter 13 here, then we get Count Olaf bringing the Daily Punctilio, unrolling it, and the headline reads Baudelaire Orphans at Large. So this is interesting. Of course, the Daily Punctilio continues to get things wrong, calling them Veronica, Clyde, and Susie Baudelaire. But yeah, we're getting more. Not more, but we're like now the Baudelaires are on the lam. It would seem. And
I don't think they have anything to worry about though, because I don't think that the police actually exist.
Right.
So if anybody recognizes them, then they're going to say like, oh, "It's the Baudelaires! Call the police!" And they're like, "We're leaving," and like they just have to wander off, and they'll be like, "I see where you're going. The police will be there any minute." Sure, okay.
Right. Yeah. But yes, ignoring that for the moment, then just thinking about it being, this interesting turn of events where they are now being supposedly wanted for the murder of Count Omar.
Yeah.
Which is actually Jacques Snicket, which they did not do as far as we can read.
It's such a weird thing that happens here. So because Olaf and this fake police officer, what was her fake name?
Officer Luciana,
who's actually Esme, because they charge the Baudelaires, like 2 of them as being accomplices and one of them being the murderer of Jacques, then it's now in the paper, but this isn't even a real police department.
Right.
The charges aren't real, but the paper is printing this, and I don't know. It seems interesting of like what police department is even going to take this case. You see my point?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I do.
I understand the point is they are on the lam. The point is everyone is now, trying to get after them, and they can't just go and stay with another guardian, presumably. They're going to have to take care of themselves, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
I get that's where we're at. Yeah,
right. It's very interesting because it's true. Just the fact that they are in the newspaper being called criminals doesn't actually make them criminals in a legal standing.
No.
But the effect is that the Baudelaires feel that they are now on the run, and so that does adjust how they.
This is the first book, because I said before, I can't remember if it was at the beginning of this one a couple weeks ago, in the first video for the Vile Village, or if it was in the previous book, but I said that Mr. Poe acts as a framing device for these books, that he's
Yeah.
always there at the beginning and he's always there at the end. But this is the first book where he's not there at the end.
Yes.
Because I noticed it, like, I mean, obviously it's there in all of the other books, but it just seemed like such an obvious device that's being used in the AirSats elevator, where it's just he randomly happens to be at the inn auction. And then I'm like, oh, we must be at the end of the book because he randomly popped up again. They didn't even call him. He just was randomly there. And so with this one, he's not there at the end. So then it's like, oh, so now it's going to be different going forward, that he's now not just going to be, the next book is not necessarily just going to pick up with him driving them someplace to their new guardian.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a really good point. As we had mentioned last week, we were at the midway point of the series. So, Mr. Poe is there at the beginning and end of the first half of the series.
Yes.
But now that we're moving into the second half, it seems to be going in a different direction, which is, it seems to have dispensed with that framing device at the exact midpoint.
Yes, you're right. That is a great point. Also, the interesting thing that in the exact midpoint of the series, in those middle chapters that we were talking about last week, you get the murder of Jacques, which now is the reason why the Baudelaires can't just go on to another guardian. That it does change the series right in the middle. I haven't read the rest of the book, so I don't know how much that holds up for the rest of them. But it does seem significant when you're looking at it and saying there's 13 books, and then 7.5, you get a murder of this guy, and they get accused of it. And so the pattern that you have in each book gets interrupted.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I did have a couple more notes. Esme and Olaf are now dating, which is, whatever.
I saw it coming.
Yeah.
She was very into Olaf in that last book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do really like the way that the last bit of the book is written on page 255 at the very top. Nobody, Violet said, will have to take care of ourselves. We'll have to be self-sustaining. Like the hot air mobile home, Klaus said, that could travel and survive all by itself. That's a really nice comparison, I guess.
Yes. It is in children's literature, then that line by Klaus is necessary. In literary fiction for adults, then that line would not be necessary, and it's up to the discerning reader to go, and that's why the mobile home self-sustaining thing was in there, right? But it's making sure that kids catch that. I don't think that it's a bad thing having it in there. I'm just saying that that would be the development. That would be, to me, the difference. It's not, because a lot of people think it's about vocabulary. It's really not about vocabulary. It's just about how, I think at least one of the difference would be how explicit some of the literary devices are. How, like, compared to being a little, you can get more and more subtle as you're dealing with more and more mature readers.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that was my last note for The Vile Village. Overall, very strong book. I had forgotten how good it is. But yeah, it really is very good, and we are going to be moving into The Hostile Hospital, which is all kinds of fun. I actually don't have very many memories of this book, so so it'll be fun to revisit it. Like, I have a general idea of what it is, but I honestly don't remember much at all. And my lamp that was dying last week, it is once again trying to die. So
it must be the end of the podcast.
I didn't change the light bulb because it kept working, and now once again, end of a podcast. It's like, hey, I'm tired.
It's in its death throes.
Yeah.
As are we. And with that, the podcast was ended.
Yes. But I did just want to quickly mention the way that the letter to the editor is written. it's just kind of fun with it being a telegram. Um, yeah, it's good to see a little bit of a change of pace. And we kind of already saw that with the last one where it was, soaking wet.
Yeah.
But yeah, this one, then it's just like, it's not even a letter.
It's so weird. I guess these books are kind of acting like the letters to the editor are acting in a way like a kind of documentary storytelling where it's like a scrapbook. Do you know what I mean? We're trying to show you the original artifact.
Right.
I've read a number of books like this that have got that scrapbook aesthetic, trying to show you that these are real documents, like fiction books that do that. And it's an interesting thing because you look at it and you're like, well, why'd you just like take a picture and publish it that way of the original letter to the editor? Because you have the text. Why not just type it?
Right.
You type the rest of it, like the soggy letter. Well, if it's, why do we need to see the original script? And then with this, why do we need to see it? Just put in the periods. But I'm saying but the effect, like the actual purpose behind it, is to replicate some kind of documentary effect to these letters of that. We're seeing these actual artifacts from it. If you're reading like a true crime book and you see like, this is the actual FBI report. This is the original police report. And you're seeing these actual documents. This is a letter written in the killer's own hand. And you're looking at them. You're like, whoa, that's what his handwriting looked like. It seems to be something like this to pull us in, to make it seem like these are really true things that actually happened. Look at the evidence. It's the actual telegraph in there. You know? You can't fake that. That's a telegraph.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that is yeah.
Did you see the company?
Western Bunyan.
It's not Western Union. It's so funny. Like, you just add a B to Union, turns into Bunyan.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But yes, and in the letter to the editor for the previous book, then the letter was soggy, and he said that he was writing it from the location where the Quagmires were being kept. So there's actually like that little bit of, I don't want to call it foreshadowing, because it's not really. It's just a tease.
It's a tease.
It's a tease within a thing that is designed to tease you.
Yes. Yes. Why would he write it from there?
I don't know. In order to fully appreciate what the Quagmires went through, I had to.
But why not
I don't know.
sit in there? Fine. But then he's like, I want to know if Violet, like, what it was like for her to write the couplets in the fountain.
Right, Isadora to write the Vindic.
Yeah, sorry, like Isadora as she writes this in the fountain. Yeah.
He's such a strange man.
Yeah. It's one of these things where, like, obviously they're not supposed to be realistic, and it either works for you or it doesn't, the silliness of it. So
yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't for me. So, but I there's the silliness. Okay, I see it. I recognize the silliness. Okay, got it.
Yep.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there for today, and then next week, then what is it called? The Hostile Hospital?
Yep.
Hostile Hospital. All right. So we'll get into chapters 1 to 4 of that next week.
Yeah, should be fun to see how the change in the Baudelaires status works and all of this.
Yeah, if it holds up, I guess, like, you're kind of hinting that it does. I guess I'm just kind of at the point of, like, does anything mean anything long term?
Right.
But yeah, we'll see. All right, folks, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Ignore the tattoo! A phrase here which means like, comment, subscribe, and share this podcast across the web. That may seem like a strange definition, but in this context, it is entirely accurate.